Um, it's no doubt that COVID has rocked the workplace and in some ways created forever changes to the way that we work. Women have been especially affected, either by choice, feeling pressed to downshift because of the third shift, or being on the receiving end of layoffs and job changes. So tonight will be actually a very thoughtful and I think rewarding conversation as we work through some of these experiences with our panelists. And before I introduce them, I would like to introduce you to Lean In Calgary's network president, Susan Alford, to share a few words.
Thank you, Rhonda. Can you all hear me okay? I'm unmuted, great. So welcome to Lean In Calgary's virtual session tonight. So excited that we can now bring one of the few blessings of COVID. We can bring our events anywhere now. You don't have to be in Calgary to attend. And so we are one of 4 networks across Canada that are associated with Lean In Canada, and we're all hosting events every month. So if you want to get some perspectives from the Lean In Canada team, there should be something for you to connect with every month during COVID for sure. So tonight we're really looking forward to welcoming our amazing panelists to talk about a topic that's near and dear to all of our hearts. It's the impact of COVID on women in the workplace and the shifts that we've all had to make, willingly or not so willingly, to accommodate our careers and our lives during this time. So for those of you new to us who may not have been to a Lean In Calgary event before, I'd like to share a little bit about our history. Lean In is a not-for-profit. There are now 50,000 circles worldwide, and the organization is the beloved philanthropic baby of Sheryl Sandberg, who many of you know is the chief operating officer of Facebook. So I first read Sheryl's book, Lean In, Women, Work, and the Will to Lead, in 2014 when it came out. And I was so inspired by what she had to say that I started a Lean In circle in Calgary. I didn't find any to join at the time, and I started what is now going as Lean In Working Moms YYC. And I want to say Lean In is not just for moms. That was just a circle that I decided to start because I wanted to really reach out to those women in corporate Calgary who might have been feeling a bit maybe lonely in the world of balancing motherhood and career. And Lean In is absolutely for everybody, and you don't even have to be a mom to attend the Lean In Lunchtime Circle, which we're still calling Lean In Working Moms. And the idea of the circle, and Sheryl's concept of it, was to have 12 to 15 women who would be meeting regularly, usually monthly, to learn and grow from each other and to build that network. Now, Lean In Calgary, as a part of Lean In Canada, has a much bigger vision. We foster the growth of circles throughout the country, but we also have these bigger citywide events where we can bring in speakers and have thought-provoking topics that can address the many issues that women in the workplace face. So I started the circle in 2015, and then Lean In Canada was formed, and I was invited to launch the Calgary Black Chapter, which I joined in 2018, and we had our first big event in September of 2019. And we had a few events last year before COVID hit us in March, and now we've moved all of our programming online. So Lean In Canada also has Lean In Toronto, Lean In Vancouver as a part of our networks, and hopefully we're growing. Now, tonight we're going to talk specifically about the Women in the Workplace study. So this study is in its 6th year, and it is a joint project between the Lean In org and McKinsey & Company. And it's the largest study of its kind on the state of women in corporate America. It does focus on the United States, but Canada is not far off. And this year, they surveyed 317 companies, and more than 40,000 people were surveyed in their workplaces. And it provides an overview of what companies are doing to support employees during COVID-19, where they stepped up and where they can do more. So it provides a detailed look at the dynamics that are driving mothers, senior level women, and Black women to consider downshifting their careers or leaving the workforce. It also recommends strategies for addressing the core challenges that women are facing at the intersection as an intersectional approach to diversity. So as we know, the events of 2020 have turned workplaces upside down. Under the highly challenging circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic, many employees are struggling to do their jobs. Many feel that they're always on now that the boundaries between work and home have blurred, and they're worried about their family's health and their finances. And burnout is a real issue. So women in particular have been negatively impacted. Women, especially women of color, are more likely to have been laid off or furloughed during the COVID-19 crisis, stalling their careers and jeopardizing their financial security. So the pandemic has intensified challenges that women have always faced, and we've been calling it the double shift or even the triple shift. So after a full day of work, followed by hours spent caring for their children, and then they have, in addition to the work, and then they have the home life, and then they have all the things that come with that. And women are still largely responsible for most of the childcare and most of the household work at home. So this is what this study in particular addresses this year. And so as a result of these dynamics that are happening, more than 1 in 4 women are contemplating what many would have considered unthinkable 6 months ago, and that's downshifting their careers or leaving their workforce entirely. And this is actually an emergency for corporate America because companies are risk losing women in leadership. They are risking future women leaders in their workplaces. And we are actually going backwards now in terms of the progress that women have made, even just in the 6 years since the study has been made. But this crisis also represents an opportunity, and the Women in the Workplace study recognizes that if companies make significant investments in building a more flexible and empathetic workplace, that there are signs, and there are signs that this is starting to happen. They're going to be able to retain their employees most affected by today's crisis and nurture a culture in which women have equal opportunities to achieve their potential over the long term. So in light of all of the findings of the study, and we will be sending you a link to it after tonight's presentation if you haven't had a chance to look at it already, but we went out looking for women who we thought would represent a cross-section of these key points that this study has put forward, and with a Canadian lens. So tonight, I'll pass the reins over to Rhonda, who will be able to introduce more fully our 4 panelists this evening. Really looking forward to having them lead the conversations around their respective opinions and circumstances. And then we'll have a series of questions, Q&A section that you'll all be able to participate in. So thank you for coming. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Rhonda.
Thanks, Susan. Yes, we do have quite a lineup of panelists, each bringing a unique perspective and experience through these challenging times, and excited and grateful that they're here to share in this genuine, authentic conversation. So I would like to actually start introducing them. We do have Bonnie Shepherd, who is former Chief Development Officer of the Equality Fund, and I think also self-professed pandemic pauser. And then we have Emma May, who is a local business leader and former lawyer. Hi, Emma. And we have Kiran Seetal, investment advisor at RBC and co-founder and board member of Calgary Black Chambers. And last but not least at all is Brandy Payne, workplace mental health consultant and former associate minister of health. Thank you very much, ladies, for joining us. It would be great just to get started. I'd like to jump into some conversation starters here. So we'll walk through a few questions to bring out some perspectives from each of the panelists. And Bonnie, I'd like to start with you. After reading the report and through some of our conversations, you have shared that one of the most common things you hear right now from your network is that they are envious of your decision to pause, but fear being able to take the same step themselves for fear of being at risk of not being able to return to work due to an uncertain job market or uncertainty about what a break in the resume or network could mean from a career setback. So Bonnie, can you share a defining moment or moments or conditions that would have led to your decision to pause?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I mean, this moment in time is such a personal experience for each of one of us that are, going through this, and we can all make the best decision that we can for our families. And, for myself, I've been working in the nonprofit sector for, nearly 20 years now, specializing in fundraising and resource mobilization. Prior to my recent role as Chief Development Officer at the Equality Fund, I was with the UN Children's Fund, UNICEF, as a National VP of Development for years. So to say I spent the better part of the last day on a plane every week is not an exaggeration. And I've always been, just really proud of the career that I've built in the sector, and, passionate about the field that I'm in. And it's one that's also allowed me to have a family. My partner and I have 2 little ones at home, a 5 and a 2-year-old when COVID hit. So we certainly have our hands full. But I've always been really good at, being laser focused on, prioritizing having the family and the career and, balancing those two. And I just, felt up until March I was doing a reasonably good job at that, and then it all kind of came crashing down. And I know everyone has had a tremendously difficult experience through COVID in one way or the other. They're all personal to their situation. But I think there were certainly a few complexities that made ours a little bit unique. First of all, we live in a condo in downtown Toronto that was intentional decision to live a lighter environmental impact. As it turns out, having in a relatively small space, open concept, where those humans are, asking for a snack every 3 minutes and, can't be left unsupervised on a all the time. The kindergartner couldn't log herself onto the computer. The 2-year-old wasn't, quite for a Zoom call. And in time where both my partner and I, were, big careers that we were very proud of. She's an executive producer for a TV show and won 2 Canadian awards. Her phone was ringing off the hook as well. So all of us were trying to kind of coexist in this tiny little trying to say. So, and at the time I wasn't just trying to hold it together for my own family, but as a leader in our organization, really trying to support my staff as they navigated their own complexities at home too. So whether that was caring for their own kids, elders in their care, for those that were on my team that were living alone, certainly, dealing with mental health things, like I wanted to be fully present for them as well. And I was really struggling with that from my own leadership perspective too, trying to really stretch myself to be there for everyone else. Business, wasn't stopping. The reality was the work needed to lead the organization. We $300 million partnership with Global Affairs Canada, building one of the world's largest feminist institutions. The strategy for how we were going to build that needed to be completely rebroken overnight when COVID hit. And we just did to lead our sections very fully. So we had an incredible feminist leadership who I was grateful to work alongside. But as leaders, we knew the pressure was on us to be successful and to get the work done. So for several months, we were kind of keeping up what felt like round the clock. And I knew we weren't going to be able to keep that up for much longer, and especially not knowing whether the kids would be returning to school in the fall and what the next year would look like as well. So, by June, 4 months in, my partner and I just sat down, conversation, and weighed out all of our options. Do we give up life in a condo in the city and move to the country, which is not something we were ready to do? Could we reduce our lifestyle a little bit and become a single income family for a while? Would one of us stay home? Who would be the one to we're very lucky to be a 2-mom household. Let me tell you, ladies, if that's ever something that you've thought about, having a copy of yourself, a second mom at home to help with the parenting and the workload, I highly recommend a 2-mom household. Might be a great option for you too. But conversation, but both bouncing the kids back and forth and all that. We just decided we didn't want to live this, frayed life any longer. And we were willing to take a big risk as a family to see if we could carve out a new reality for this little moment in time. So we decided I would be the one to stay at home. And to be honest, that was the bravest. I was always defined myself certainly by my career, worked hard to create it, had never more considered what would my life would look like or how I would define myself without a clear role or a title or how, defined way how I'd spend my days. And yet here I am 5 weeks into my first career pause in 20 years, it's a much simpler life so far. And I'm totally okay with that after the year that we just had. I'm sleeping well, getting lots of spending lots of time with the kids, and it feels good. But I won't lie, I still have moments that I'm working through, like coming on a call like this, where I've always been very confident on these calls because I've had a specific role and this person with this title representing this organization. This is who I am, and I'm just Bonnie, and I'm okay with that. Like taking a next step for me, and that's where we are. And just finally, I'm also really taking this time just to be aware of my privilege as a white woman. I think in a 2 equal parent household, I think is a really important part too, that allowed me to make a conscious choice to take a career pause in this moment, unexpectedly, but certainly here we are. And I'm quite sure that there are very few people when you look at that, particularly from parent households that could have made the same choice that I did to take that pause. And I just feel really strongly that each of us of white privilege needs created this system that we're all benefiting from, and just intentionally committing to learning and doing whatever we can to be better allies. I think it was, Paulette Senior is the CEO of the Canadian Women's Foundation. She said to me one time, we need to find ways to continually find space for everyone to see the voice. Person that table is too small, then we need to go and find another room and build a bigger table. And I think we can all commit to doing that. And I just love that. So yeah, it's been an incredible month of reflection and personal recovery probably, but we're just staying positive and explore what the future.
Yes. Thank you, Bonnie. I know that we've been experiencing a little bit of lag and maybe a little bit of buffering with some of your comments. So I think if we are experiencing that in the future, maybe what we can do is we can turn off camera and try turning camera back on. There's some great points. We just want to make sure that our teams continue to hear all of this great input. Thank you very much for sharing that. I know that it's not, it hasn't been easy, and it takes some vulnerability and some courage to step out or step back. So thank you very much. And we are seeing some conversation happen in the group chat. So continue to use the chat. And as we get into the Q&A section, we will actually pull out those questions to have an opportunity for dialogue with each of our panelists. So thank you. I'd like to switch over to Emma. And now Emma, thank you again for joining us as well. And you have certainly been very active in and aware of the impact of COVID realities on working women, women in business, obviously, and your own personal impact. Susan had mentioned Lean In, kind of coining the third shift, or maybe even the fourth shift now, depending on what we're all responsible for. Can you just talk a little bit about some of the experiences you've had as a business owner during these times, and even how you're handling the uncertainty?
There we go. I did the classic, was muted. Now I'm unmuted. Okay, you guys can all hear and see me now. Yeah, so I think a few of the interesting things that I've been dealing with over the course of this is, well, number one is my primary business is sophiegrace.ca, and that sells what is generally dressier clothes for women who are working in the workplace. And of course, no one was going into the office. So that was it's been a bit of a tension since we launched in January, and then the pandemic hit in, March. And people then were like, okay, well, we're not going into the office. So what am I going to do? Are people going to buy our product? How did this impact sort of things that we were looking at going forward? So from a pure business point and perspective, it was for sure an incredibly challenging year. What happened with that though was, hey, I'm a little thrown off. Am I meant to be on this? What do I see? What do you guys see? Do you guys see me, or do you guys see Rhonda right now? You see me? Okay. All right. So I'm still staring at Rhonda, so I'm totally confused about what's actually happening here. All right. Anyway, I'll keep going. But so I'm in this really lucky position though, because I'm at the stage of my career where I'm kind of past, whether or not the kids are at home and doing stuff. I'm sort of past whether or not I can make, I have to be putting in the FaceTime in the office, all of that stuff. Like, I own my own business now. I'm the one making the decision and the call around that. My kids are almost 17 and 19. So they're kind of, to some degree, relatively self-sufficient. Nobody's going to starve to death. They can all order Uber Eats. I get the little notification on my phone. Everybody's surviving. So, so I mean, we've had to go through the course of them getting adjusted to online school, and my daughter was over at university, and it was a totally different experience than what you would usually have. But I've been to some degree really insulated from the impacts that I've seen a lot of my customers have. And that is that they are the ones who are now, working from home, doing that third shift, working overtime hours, exhausted on Zoom calls, right? Like, how many people are doing, like, why is Zoom so exhausting? It's so weird. We all have this kind of like thing at the end of the day after you've done like 10 Zooms and you're like, fuck, I'm fried. And that's just the way it is. But what I've dug into through this and through my company is that our values are based in this idea of like, I want women to win at work. And what does that look like from a holistic perspective? And I think what this pandemic has really done, it's shown that when women bear the burden of childcare most of the time. Women bear the burden of these extra hours of labor within the household most of the time. So from a policy perspective, what does that look like in terms of advocacy, right? And what does that look like in terms of how is it that we're going to actually solve the problem of, pay equity, and how are we going to solve issues around like childcare? I'm a big proponent of socialized childcare. I think that, having a universal childcare policy is actually good for, economics. I think you can make a business case for it. I think you increase your tax base. Let's be clear about that. And I think from an early childhood education perspective, the data proves out that it's super important. So for me, what it's done is it's really given me insight into who my customers are and what their needs and concerns are on a daily basis. And then what is, I have a big mouth, so I'm always, beaking off about stuff. So my company ends up having to, it just sort of integrates into what we do. But as I look forward, I'm like, these are sort of the generational problems that we have to solve if we're actually going to solve the underlying issue of women's equality at work, right? And so that's been a huge thing for me. And to be honest, like I said before, one of the reasons I've been able to start, one of the things that I love about my company right now is, I was standing in my closet one day it was like May 2018, and I was like, why do I the call. So I used to work for the former Premier Prentice, and then Brandy's was an NDP, and so they beat us. And then when they beat us, I stayed home for 6 months, and I think I threw out like all my suits. So then finally, when I was standing in my closet in May 2018, I was like, why does nobody make a pencil skirt and a matching blouse that's exactly the same? I totally don't get it. And I thought, well, I should go about doing this. And so I started doing that, but I did it by talking to people and reaching out to people I knew and said, who knows how to do this? And I got access to this incredible talent that my friend and consultant Lisa, and she works in Vancouver. And Lisa was a senior level designer and product manager at Lululemon. But Lisa had 2 little kids. So she left her job at Lulu, and she ended up having, so she was looking at doing some consulting, and I was like, and I got access to her. Now I never would have had access to someone of her level of talent and expertise did she not actually choose at this stage of her career to, I wouldn't say take a pause in the same way that Bonnie took a pause, but step back and find a different way to balance her priorities. And so what's interesting about it though is now, we've been working together on the collection and on stuff for 2 years, and here she is now, she's a huge part of my team. She's making pretty decent, not the same money that she made before, but she has incredible flexibility. And she is now, becoming an equity partner in the company. And she's got we do Zoom calls with her kids sitting on the lap. And I really, I don't care because I've been there. I've done that. And I think that's what sort of having a woman in a leadership position can actually change, right? Is that I'm now building a company where I recognize what the limitations are of the people who work for me. And really all I need to happen is that the work gets done. And, time and time again, women get the work done, and they get it done incredibly well. And so I don't need to have this weird structure or formality or like, no, you have to be here at this time, and aren't you doing X number of hours for me and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, I want the final product to be amazing. And that's what's happened. So I've been super lucky in being able to build something where, that's integrated into sort of our whole brand philosophy is how do we make that work? And there's a few people actually that I have my eye on out in Vancouver for some more senior leadership positions within my company who are kind of in the exact same place, right? They're at places where they're grinding out at 9 to 5 or, longer hours. They don't have a ton of flexibility. They've got demands in their life. And I'm like, if I present an opportunity to them, I think this could be a win-win-win. So I see this as, I've been really lucky because of the fact that I've been able to say to women, let's make this work for you, man. Whatever that looks like, you've got the talent, you've got the skill set, we'll find a way to make it work. Anyway, that was my rant.
No, not a rant at all. I think what's interesting, and I'm watching the chat as well, people talking about 10 Zoom calls, really? Like how,
Oh, yeah.
like yeah, Zoom for 10, and 10, that's 10 on a slow day, right? I've been in meetings back to back 30 minutes and they're all Zoom or Microsoft Team meetings. Instead of, jumping into a meeting room, they are online, but they do take a toll. One thing that kind of struck me as you were talking, Emma, too, though, is what I'm really appreciating about Zoom and people working from home with their kids on their laps or their cats walking across screens is it's really humanizing people.
Yeah.
We've never seen them in that element before. So I'm seeing even a switch at my organization in how people who have seemed to be less approachable are actually some of the bigger champions of flexible work arrangements or continuing what's been working through COVID, even when we do get to go back.
Yeah.
So
It's I mean, I have a team in Vancouver as well. So Zoom obviously works for me and it cuts down the need for me to travel. That said, like I miss the personal interaction with people, right? Like I miss that connectivity. I miss humanity. I miss the, let's go grab a coffee and shoot the shit on this. And there's a lot of stuff sometimes where I'm like, we really need to just have a phone call. Like this doesn't need to, like, there is sometimes I'm like, does everything need to be a Zoom? Everything doesn't need to be a Zoom. Sometimes it could be like hey, how's it going, man? Right?
phone call.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, I'm again looking at some of the comments here, and I would have to say on a positive side, I am seeing more of my male counterparts, even in senior leadership positions, having their 2-year-old daughter on their lap, or some of them sitting in what looks like probably their son's spare bedroom with the mismatched IKEA furniture, right? Because that's where they got sequestered. So, like
And
I said,
dogs barking. There's always the dog. Like my dogs are always. There's always like this inopportune time where the dogs bark at the. Yeah, yeah. But
yeah.
from a pandemic perspective, like I think we're just all, we're all exhausted. We all see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. None of us really know that's gonna. What I do know, I look at the world right now. I say to myself, this is a moment in time. This isn't forever. That doesn't mean that there won't be significant changes that come out of this, right? And I think, that's the opportunity that we need to seize upon in terms of being able to make some of these changes and advocate, especially for women, about where it is that we need, what is it that we need to change. I think universal childcare is really fundamentally a prime issue of, there. And that's what I would like to focus on going forward.
Yes. No, thank you for sharing that, Emma. Very much appreciate that. And Kiran, I would like to switch a conversation over to you as well now. And when we're talking about, women of color, I know that sometimes, women of color are the onlys on a team or in a room or in a group. And from your experience, like how is that feeling played out in your career?
Thanks for this opportunity here today. I think a lot of it did play out in my career with the sense of I might not have thought that I had the chance to do certain roles. So as I slowly progressed upward, I got to a point when I was working as an associate and I thought, well, maybe this is kind of the most I can do. I'd really like to be an advisor, but there aren't a lot of people that look like me and they don't often hire people that look like me. So I didn't think that could be a possibility for me. I think that led me to wait longer than maybe I could have. I think I had the potential to step forward maybe 2 years ago, but I waited until just last year at the end of 2019 is when I finally did take the chance to go from a salary position to starting my own role in a commission-based role. And that's a scary task to do for the first time in your life as well. Not to mention then, so January comes around, I'm, hitting the ground running as fast as I can. By February, I feel like, I'm really hitting my stride. I'm finding a flow in this, and this is feeling really great. And I'm starting to get there. And I was building a lot of my business going out to events and networking. And so when March came around and it was just go home and everything's canceled, I had a moment where I thought, like, now what? How am I going to build this business and how am I going to get out there with us stuck at home? And so it really forced me to re-examine how I'm working. So I'm finding new ways to connect with people and new ways to expand my skill sets. And so it's really forced me to evolve. And I think I'll go back to the workforce once we go back into whatever the new normal looks like, with a lot of more tools in my toolbox than I might have had otherwise. And often too, being the only, I think a lot of companies now are starting to realize that diversity does add a lot of value. if there's nobody that looks like me in my position, then maybe the communities that look like me are being underserved as well in this area. So I think it does add a lot of great opportunities for businesses to grow and reach out to new audiences that they might not have had attraction in. And then on top of that, you know, being the only, it was, you know, it was in the workplace and it was also outside in the community. And I know Calgary is a pretty diverse city, but I didn't always see that reflected in the rooms I was in. And so eventually my partner and I, we kind of looked at each other and we thought, well, why is that? And you're going through the report was really when I saw that only feeling, and it finally gave kind of a word to a feeling I can describe, but I knew existed. And that really just prompted us to be like, what can we do to change that? How can we change this so that going forward that we aren't the onlys in a room and that there's more people like us? So we really just started to connect with the other onlys in a room. So if I was somewhere and I saw another only, then hey, let's make a connection, let's do something. And once we got a few people together, we all came together and we said, well, how can we change this? How can we make sure our companies and our boardrooms are more diverse? And we came up with the 4 pillars of fellowship, advocacy, mentorship, and scholarship, with, you know, the superstars really being the mentorship piece. I think we can all attest to how powerful and impactful a mentorship can be, especially as a young person. If you start early, you've got that much more confidence instilled in you by the time you actually enter the workforce. And so we're hoping to foster growth and confidence in the next generation of professionals so that when they enter the workforce, they're no longer the onlys.
No, thank you for that. It is an interesting conversation, and I think even just with talking about expanding your network during COVID, maybe some of the things that we're learning through breaking down even geographical barriers, because even this virtual event, while it's hosted in Calgary and typically would have been held in person in Calgary, look at people from all across, you know, places of North America, right, who are joining us tonight. So I think there is an opportunity there for us to definitely broaden those networks. And maybe just to close this out, are there specific tips, you know, that you would have for leaders or companies to ensure women, you know, and the BIPOC employees are heard, represented, or have an opportunity to grow or thrive in the workplace?
Absolutely. I think, you know, hiring practice is a really big piece. If we can change the way that looks from the get-go, we're already attracting different talent that we naturally would have before. I had a conversation throughout this year with somebody who is a hiring manager, and she mentioned kind of casually about when she's going through resumes, if there's a name on that resume that she can't pronounce, it's going to the bottom of the pile. You know, and I was kind of shocked to hear that, because to me that seems like a bias. But this is where we're talking a little bit more around the unconscious bias. There are certain things that we don't know. We don't know our own blind spots until we're able to see them, or someone, you know, talks to us and educates us around that. So I think that's a huge piece, is that we're educating like anti-racism and unbiased training to not only hiring managers, but also people managers and that middle level of management that maybe doesn't always get that training. Oftentimes they're the custodians to a lot of your talent and a lot of your great talent. And unless we have some practices like that in place, you might not be able to see that person, and they might not be able to rise to the occasion, and you might lose them. You might lose a really good talented person because they weren't felt or seen there. I think when you start bringing diverse hiring practices, you introduce that diversity of thought. You know, different people think differently, and it's not just your background or your experiences, your opinions. It's often how you approach problems. You know, are you analytical in your approach? Are you organized in your approach? Are you interpersonal? Are you a more strategic thinker? You know, if you can imagine, if you put 3 strategic thinkers at a table, they're going to come up with a very strategic plan and process, and it's going to resonate with strategic thinkers. But if you put an analytical person and an interpersonal person and a strategic thinker together, I think the outcome is going to look very different and will also resonate with a wider range of audience. You know, and then when we start doing more of these things, all of a sudden your employees really start to reflect the communities that you serve. And then you're all of a sudden a great place to work and a well-performing company, because it's been shown that companies that do practice diversity and inclusion have upwards of 50% better share performance and employee satisfaction. So I think that's a huge, huge part that we can start to foster that change.
Well, I really appreciate that, Kiran. And, you know, from kind of growing through my career as well, you know, we typically talk about, or we have been talking about from a communications perspective, how do we actually put the end user kind of in the planning process? How do we co-create? So we started co-creating and bringing people together, but like you said, like-minded people, right? So we're thinking of our end user, but we're not our end user. We're not the employee that we're trying to reach. We're not, you know, the specific audience member or the frontline worker. So what we are doing now, instead of just having them in mind, have them in the room so they can contribute to that plan, to truly co-creating with them participating. And it's really starting to show its value, to your point on trust, inclusion, engagement, talent attraction, retention, et cetera, right? So I think there's something there, and the more that we can foster that, or role model that, and kind of get out of that thought that we need to know it all and do it all and be perfect at it. Let's be vulnerable and let's truly co-create. Thank you for that. This is a very informative conversation, and it's a lot of information as well. And I know threaded throughout each of the updates and the information provided by our panelists and even our opening remarks, all of this is having a toll on people in various ways. And from a mental health perspective, Brandy, I am going to turn it over to you. Specifically, we know that COVID has been exacerbating, it's exacerbated existing challenges, right? It's stripping away many of our supports or coping mechanisms. We talked about childcare, homeschooling, there's mental health and burnouts as top challenges, right? And then you add financial stress, anxiety over layoffs, and other concerns. These are definitely all weighing on everybody, right? And women, I would say in particular as well. But it can overwhelm and create other mental health challenges. So Brandy, with that, how are you seeing the impacts of COVID-19 playing out in mental health of employees working remotely, to start with?
Yeah, that's a really fantastic question. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing for folks who are working remotely is that blend between home and work. For so many of us, for so long, we go to work. We put on our shoes, our coats, our fancy outfits, as Emma was talking about, and then we leave our house. And then we have like a transition ritual, which is the commute to and from work. And then we come home and we do the transition ritual in reverse, and then we've kind of got that break between our work life and our home life. And so having that really separate spheres for a lot of folks. Whereas with the move to working from home and working remotely, it's really easy to have it just kind of spill over into our evening, to work all the hours, or, I might as well pop on email and try and get to inbox zero, because what else am I going to do? How many more times can I watch the same series on Netflix? There's the lack of that transition ritual and the shutdown time has been a real challenge for a lot of folks. And as a result, the boundaries between work and life have blurred, or the rest of life have blurred even more. And let's be honest, these guys made it hard beforehand, because so many of us have our work emails coming into our mobile phones and we're checking them all the time. We feel that vibration, even sometimes when it's not there. And then as a result, we don't really fully turn off. And then when you add that to the strain, particularly in times when childcare and school weren't available for working parents, we're then having that shift during the day between parenthood and working. Or for those of us who are, doing caregiving responsibilities for elders, our parents, grandparents, et cetera, having those things kind of interfering with the work day. Like we didn't have that same set period of time that we're used to. And so you kind of feel like you're always working and always doing something. And that can be really, can really weigh on our mental health and our well-being. Just real quick, I'm going to ask a favor of everyone. So do y'all know where the reactions thing is on the camera or on your Zoom? Can I get everyone to just give me like a little thumbs up reaction or something? I'm curious to, awesome. Okay, awesome. Okay, I was wondering if you would show if we did the video off, and it does indeed. So now I know. Okay, because what I wanted to actually ask is, so one of the things I talk about a lot is the impact of stress on us and our mental health, as well as like the risk of burnout. So I'm just wondering if you feel like on a scale of 1 to 10, with like risk of burnout and feeling like your mental health has been struggling since the start of the coronavirus, or even before, can you give me a thumbs up if you would say that you're like an 8 or higher on a scale of 1 to 10? And if you would say that you're like 5 to 7, can you give me, wait, what's one of the other reactions? Maybe let's give me the applause guy, the one with the hands like this. Cool. What if you would say you're under 5? Can you give me the little celebration one? Oh man, I'm super jealous of all you under 5s. Cool. I've been asking this question at panels for a while now. And an interesting thing I've noticed is that I don't find anyone who says that they're under 2. Most people are at 6 and higher. And so ultimately, like what we're seeing is that everyone is feeling a lot more challenges, and trying to like have those boundaries between work and life so that we feel like we've got a little bit more of a sense of balance. And I don't mean balance in terms of 50-50, because I don't actually believe in that or really even want that. I really love work and I like having it be a big part of my life. And I often joke that if it was only 50% of my life, I might actually be pretty miserable. But you know, the idea of having what feels like balance to us and feeling like we have time for ourselves, time for our loved ones, and time for the work that we need to get done. And I think one of the other challenges that we're really seeing with the coronavirus and the restrictions and the impact that it's had on the economy is our workloads have really ramped up. And I think this is particularly true here in Calgary for those of us who, you know, like a number of our industries have been having a bit of a tough time. I mean, let's be clear, the oil and gas industry has been in kind of a rough shape since roughly fall of 2014. And it's been kind of an ongoing challenge that has had a like trickle through impact on the rest of the economy. And so most of us, no matter what our job is, you know, with the threat of layoffs, with the threat of the economy on our jobs, we're doing more work with usually less time. And so those workload pressures can get really out of hand and can be really challenging, contributing to our stress level and our burnout. The pandemic really has just kind of shone the spotlight on some of these challenges that were existing before. I mean, like, give me any one of the reactions if you felt like, you know, it was challenging before the pandemic too, where you sometimes felt like you were struggling to get things by, and you know, sometimes had some days that were feeling really rough and others that weren't. Cool. Thank you for being honest, the rest of you. I'm not sure if you're just so much more balanced beforehand or if you're just not ready to be honest, and that's cool too, because, you know, it's a new group. The thing is, though, we really want to be doing what we can to address, you know, some of those systemic problems and the challenges in the workplace that are impacting our mental health, as well as some stuff around individual change. So individual change, that looks like things like looking after our own mental well-being, whether that's talking to a therapist or your best friend, whether that's, you know, taking some time off for breaks during the course of your day, which, by the way, actually makes you more productive at your job. So super recommend breaks during your day. Or, you know, if it's just a matter of trying to get a little bit of movement into your day, whatever that looks like for you. So some of those self-care strategies that we often hear about, and moving self-care beyond bubble baths and manicures, which I'm not gonna lie, I love those things, but they're not really the things that we need to recharge us. And self-care really does have 4 pieces to it. There's a physical part, a mental part, an emotional part, as well as a spiritual aspect to it. And so finding ways to squeeze in something within your schedule that really works for you is really important. If you follow me on LinkedIn, I post about like different tips for at work and squeezing stuff in at home and managing workload and expectations at work. I post about that stuff all the time. So if we're not already connected, I'd love to connect with you that way. But when we look at the systemic changes and some of the stuff we can do at work, there's, you know, Emma talked about national system of childcare, which so exciting to think that this might be starting to come down the pike. But it's also, you know, talking to our bosses about our workload and, you know, picking those priorities of like, you know, the 3 things we're going to work on in the week, and the other things still exist. And if we have time, we can get to them, but we're not going to, you know, try and get 20 things done in 5 minutes. And it can also mean things like setting a couple of boundaries at work, around things like saying, listen, I've got a morning full of Zoom meetings and I don't know when I'm actually going to get this work done. Do I really need to be at this 10 o'clock? And having that conversation with the person organizing it, or ask them if they can just send you a note afterwards, things like that. These are ways that we can address some of the systemic challenges at work and some of the ways that our workplace has a negative impact on us. And it really, I mean, it's a matter of trying to set those boundaries and putting it in a way that it kind of frames it as for what's good for your boss about it, right? Like, it's not that you don't want to be on the Zoom call with them, even though you might not want to be on the Zoom call. But what it really is it's being on that Zoom call means you're not going to have time to do the work that you need to do, hit the priorities they want, and get the job done. So framing it up as like, I know this is a priority. I really need an extra hour today to work on this to get it done. Can I skip this meeting? So things like that are some of the ways that we can, work to support ourselves while also, showing up in a way that lets the people in our workplace know that we are there for the work, who are into it, but we also, need to look after our own mental well-being.
No, thank you. Like you said, this is probably a topic in and of itself that we could, have a 3-hour session, if not a 3-day session.
I could talk about this stuff all day, and what I love about my job is that I actually get to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think like a lot of it does resonate. And I think even just with a number of the participants as well, what stands out for me in this is that, and I think from my own personal perspective too, but how do we, I think it is about communicating, sharing the experience, being vulnerable, right? Framing it the right way, but ask for help. One of the questions earlier on is just like, wondering why only women are dealing with the 3rd shift or the 4th shift, right? Are we enabling, right? So how can we also be part of our own solution, either in helping each other, or like if we have the opportunity in a partner as well to ask for help, and to, because sometimes if you don't ask, people don't know, or they don't know how to help, or they think they're helping.
Well, and there's also, a comment thread going right now talking about walking meetings. And, one of the things that you can do and suggest is like, listen, can we do this as an old-fashioned phone call? And then you just pop in your headphones and maybe you want to bring your phone, well, you'll have your phone with you, so you can like then flip over to the notes section if there's anything that you need to jot down. Or if you prefer handwriting, you can just bring along a notebook, things like that. Don't cross the street while you're jotting down the notes, please be careful. But those sorts of ideas. And it's interesting too, because one of the things I found I'm saying a lot to people when I'm emailing and setting up meetings is I'm like, do you want to do a Zoom or an old-fashioned phone call? And it's interesting because like some folks are they're just done with being on screen. But even just turning off your self-view, I find can be really helpful, because then you're not checking out your hair. Mine's actually off. I have no idea how close I was to my hair when I just did that. But like taking the time to suggest alternatives, because I think, one of the other things that we're seeing is there's a lot more group meetings happening, because it's easier to get everyone into a Zoom call and on a Zoom link than it is to try and pull everyone into the boardroom. And like if everyone was sitting in the same room at the office, we would notice how many times and how long we were sitting there in a way that I think is harder to notice when we're just sitting at our desks. And so, having those options for, one-to-one conversations to be on the phone, or even just quicker check-ins via text and the like. And then again, asking the question of, hey, listen, do I need to be at this call because I've got all this other work that I need to do? And then from there, adjusting. And part of the reason it's important to think about and like to take some time to, and I encourage everyone to do this, to take some time to reflect on where the pressure points in your day are, whether it's your work day or at home, and then see what some of the solutions to that could be. Like, because when we have the same things that keep causing stress for us and being those stress points for us, it's really easy to assume there's nothing we can do about it, or that if we can't just completely get rid of it, that it's not even worth having the conversation. But sometimes there's little twists and little tweaks that we can make that make it more manageable for us. And if that's not an option, then maybe we can try and build ways into our day to support our mental health. So if I've got a meeting with someone who I know is going to be a stressful experience, I'm going to book a bit of recovery time afterwards where, like, you know, it's blocked off in my calendar and I'm just going to go sit and have a cup of tea. Or, you know, as I was waiting for it to be my turn to speak, I was practicing deep breathing while I was smiling into the camera. So, you know, things like that are things that we can do. And being aware of what works for you and what doesn't is really important. And I've actually got a workbook off my website, and I'll pop the link in the chat when my section's done, that people can go and download, that actually walks through some ideas on identifying your key stressors and finding ways to address them, as well as some ideas on approaching difficult conversations, building a self-care plan that fits into the reality of your schedule. Because I mean, like, hands up who actually has like time for self-care these days, and who could really use a little bit of like trying to like shoehorn it into their day is I think a really common challenge, particularly for those of us with younger kiddos.
Yeah. No, that's very good. And on the note of resources, at the end of this session, we typically will send out, well, we always send out a follow-up. We will include links, additional links to what you're sharing, Brandy, but also some additional resources that the participants can continue to dig into, to continue with helping themselves throughout these challenging times. So thank you. I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and also your resources. This has been a fantastic discussion, right? There's a lot of information to take in, very relevant. I just want to thank all of our panelists for sharing so authentically tonight, and even for the chat, just looking at the participants and the vulnerability and the willingness to share in that space as well is really, I think, what also is going to help us navigate our way through these things. I would like to close off the panel and just maybe ask more of a broad question, and then we can get into Q&A with the broader audience. And maybe like we can start with you, Brandy, since you're kind of in spotlight right now, and then work our way through the panelists. But what advice would you have for women even earlier in their career, right? If you knew then what you know now, right? Anything you wish you had done or didn't do?
Oh, like sometimes I wish I could go back in time and just like sit myself down. One of the things is like, it's going to all be okay. I think that's one thing that our younger versions of ourselves need to hear more often. But I think, you know, definitely don't underestimate the value of healthy work habits. One of my challenges throughout my work history is that I'm a very ambitious person. I work really hard. I now call myself a high achiever because it feels nicer to my heart to say that. But certainly someone who does a lot of work and is prone then to burnout by not setting healthy boundaries and healthy self-care. And learning how to do that in my late 30s when I was a cabinet minister with an infant was super hard. So I think the more that you can develop those habits now, the more sustainable your work will be, but also the research really shows that sustainable work habits actually help you be more productive and you're better at your job when you take breaks. So if I could go back and talk to 20-year-old Brandy, I would probably tell her that it's okay to take a break if you're not having a smoke break, and that just getting outside and going for a walk or just a cup of coffee is totally cool, and you should feel free to do that. Although, you know, I'm sure I'm not the only one who's had that experience of workplace cultures where you're supposed to just be in your chair, head down the whole time. And if that's you, let me know. I can send you some links to studies about the importance of breaks on productivity.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Brandy. Kiran, I would like to ask the same question.
You know, I would go back to the portion about a mentor. I think I would have found a mentor sooner and earlier. I believe it would have gotten me where I wanted to go at a little bit of a better pace, and maybe saved me a few of those learning pain points on my own if I would have had somebody to say, you know, I've walked in your shoes and here's what I did and here's what it took to get me here, and here's some things that you should consider along the way. So I can't stress the importance of a mentor enough. It really makes a world of a difference to have somebody there supporting you, advising you, and guiding you throughout it all.
Great. Thank you. Emma.
Sorry, I did it again. You know, I had a really unusual career, and it took an unusual path. I was 28 when I had Sophie, my daughter, and she's 19 now, and I was a first-year lawyer, and I moved back to Calgary to be with my husband, and I just had been working in Vancouver, and to be honest, I couldn't get a job to save my life here. So I was like Dean's List Law School, working at a big firm in Vancouver. I was, then I got pregnant, had a baby, couldn't get a job when I was pregnant. Duh. That was the way it was back then. And then I ended up getting a job at a film company working in-house. And that, and so I had these and then I had another baby, and then, his husband was killed by a drunk driver, and then I lost my job because I was working from home. And so I sort of had these crazy things that happen along the way, and none of my career was normal, right? Like none of it was following this path that sort of my male peers were on, right? And I felt like I had fucking failed, right? Like I really felt like I had failed, and that it had not, and that I sucked, because here I was, meant to be a fourth-year lawyer, and instead I was sort of trying to still piece together a career, and it didn't look like the way I had thought it would look like. And I couldn't find a way to be the mom that I wanted to be and practice law at the level that I wanted to practice. And so I ended up quitting law about 13 years ago, and went into real estate, which of course horrified my mother and my father, and I think my mother was a lawyer, was like, oh my God, real estate agents, like they're the scum of the earth. And I was like, that's really helpful, that's awesome, super supportive, thank you. And then I ended up founding a brokerage, and finding my way and finding my voice and things like that. But I couldn't have done I couldn't have done it because there wasn't somebody who was on that path, right? Like the path wasn't, it was one that I ended up having to build for myself. And I think what I found most important about that process was, if I can find a way to get my own clients and build my own thing, and that's what I've ended up doing, is I kind of had to make my own jobs, right? And because I made my own jobs, I was able to control the environment that I was working in. I was able to control when it was that I was working. And so I learned how to sell myself, how to sell my services, no matter what I was doing. And that was a really huge learning for me, because then I was in control. I was in control of what clients I got in the door. I just was in control, and nobody else was telling me this is when and where I have to work or how I have to do things. So I would say it's been a grind. And for a long time, I felt like I was failing. And, now I don't feel that, right? And I feel like actually all of these things have built up to this point where, I actually have much more control and autonomy, and, and I feel in some ways like I'm 48 and I'm like, fuck, I'm just getting started. Sorry, I swear, guys. But I'm like, I'm just getting started, and I'm super excited about the path in front of me. Right. And why for me, things like childcare, these are really important things to me, because I could see how they could have impacted my career, and I could have ended up on a different journey if I had sort of more certainty around some of those things, right? Anyway, I get kind of emotional thinking about it, because it is a bit, it hasn't been a straight path, and people look back and they're like, oh, you do all these things. And I'm like, yeah, but that wasn't like the plan. Like, it's just that's how it happened. Right. So that's sort of my take on it.
Yeah, well, I love the comment from Amy. Thank you. She's saying that it's interesting that, that we're learning sometimes careers don't have to look the same as others, right? It's a journey. I think sometimes we do ourselves a disservice when we look at somebody and think that it either needs to be exactly this way or exactly that way. I'm trying to think about, how do I take bits and pieces, right, to carve my own path. And I'm even thinking about what our children are experiencing right now in midst of COVID, and trying to decide, like I have a son who's in grade 12. What's it going to look like after he graduates, right, in the midst of all of this? How many students are going to take gap years that didn't consider taking gap years, right, based on what's going on? So it's that backup plan, if you will, or the plan B, or just be flexible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you sharing your story. And Bonnie, Same question to you.
Emma, that was so inspiring. Thank you for sharing that. And just to build on what you and Rhonda were saying right there is, I feel in my experience, so much as you advance further in your career, you realize it's all about just making decisions, right? As you go forward in your career, you are getting paid to make decisions at increasingly riskier, more strategic, more opportune levels. And hopefully you're making good, well-informed ones, fingers crossed. And some of them will bear a lot of the organization that you're working with or that you're leading, and some are just the everyday decisions. But getting really good at making decisions, I think, is a really important piece as you're going forward. And one of the things that I started doing really early on in my 20s, I actually had a mentor at the time that gave me this suggestion, which I'm so grateful for, and I'm happy to pass this on to anyone else that's starting in their career, is watch the leaders in your organization elsewhere on the decisions they have to make and how they go about making them. Practice yourself thinking through what you would have done in the same spot. And I have found in my 20 years that has allowed me to advance so quickly, because I was already ready to start making this the next level before I got there, because I'd been practicing it the whole way through. It bore no risk, on me. My decision that I was going to make in practice wasn't going to have an effect on the outcome. The decision had already been made, but I was practicing doing it without any risk, so that I was ready to do it when I did get into those. And I felt really confident making the decisions because I had so much experience doing it as I was going through. So that would be my tip, is practice decision making.
I like that. It is a practice, I think. So thank you very much. We're getting some great questions coming in through the chat line. So it'd be great for us to maybe move into that portion. And I think just with one of the recent conversations we just had, or comments, and I'll open it to the panelists, so feel free to each comment as you see fit. What do you consider the learnings, right? What you got out of COVID, right? What are the learnings out of the COVID times? What have you learned? And maybe I would even add to that, what would you like to maybe continue moving forward?
I can go. One of the things that I guess I was more reminded of it than learned it, because I knew it from before, but sometimes we forget things, we have to be reminded, is just how important having routine and building into the schedule when you're going to be looking after yourself. So for the part of the pandemic, so I have two children. They're currently 9 and 4, but when school stopped, they were 8 and 3. And so, when school ended, my husband and I sat down and kind of like blocked off the day for who was going to be working when. And we had a very small window of dedicated work time each day, because we were kind of subbing off work time and parenting time. And I actually at one point made the decision to spend a half hour of my focus work time to go outside and go for a walk every day, which kind of then became my transition ritual for starting my work day. But then also getting outside, clearing my head, taking that bit of time for me, and like having that break between work and the rest of my life was really, really helpful, and really allowed me to focus on the work ahead. And then I think also, prioritizing, right? Spending the time to identify what are the critical things that need to get done, whether it's at home or if it's at work, and then being realistic about the energy that I have. So in the pre-call, I was joking around about how I was using the Zoom backgrounds for a while because my basement is a mess. Well, during the middle of a global pandemic, while I'm parenting and trying to work, was not a good time to try and clear out my basement. And I had to just be okay with that. And so taking on extra projects at a time when our bandwidth is already tapped is just not good. And so, that bit of like grace and ease for ourselves, I think, is really important.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can jump in there. I would say one of the learnings that it's been a crazy year, right? Like it's been an insane year, and it's been a really intense year for people. And in the middle of the year, we had the Black Lives Matter movement. Oh shit, there's the dogs, of course. But we had the Black Lives Matter movement, and it made me take a step back and reframe how I want to build a company that is inclusive, about how and what my own blind spots are, right? And about really trying to sit back and be like, oh boy, because I've got some, right? And they're ones that I didn't know that I had. And then there's decisions that, you know, and so how do I make decisions in a different framework? I'm working on another project right now with this fellow, Tim Fox, who's with the, he's an Indigenous sort of, I don't know how to call it. He's a consultant with the Calgary Foundation, and he, you know, has been working around this place of, gave me a framework called brave spaces. And instead of safe spaces, it's a process by which we sort of engage in conversation with others, where we are open and we acknowledge our own biases, and we become comfortable with the fact that we may be offended or we may be threatened. And how is it that we sit with some of that in our own spaces? And I'll forward the slide to the organizers, because I think it's a super powerful thing. And so for me, the learning year have been, you know, I think deep, and it's also been one of gratitude, right? Like the fact that I can sit on a Zoom call and do my work is, you know, really lucky, actually, right? Like I know I complain about them, but I'm not. People who we, you know, it's how we frame looking at, you know, the workers in our society who don't necessarily have the same ability to, you know, to work from home. Like working from home is a gift in a pandemic. I'm not out there putting myself at risk every day, like a lot of people who we call essential workers are in our society. So I think for me, it's been a reframe around the blessings that come with even the frustrations that I have, right? And really trying to dive into that. And also the fact that everything can change, but that change comes opportunity, right? And so as we cling to what we knew and what we thought was happening, how do we let go of that enough to allow the possibility of what might and could happen? And how do we shape the future going forward instead of just being pissed off?
Very good. Kiran or Bonnie, is there anything you want to add to that? And we can move on to some other questions as well.
No, I think I'm on board with Emma in the sense that, you know, this is a time to be grateful. I am quite grateful to be able to work from home and not have to be on the front lines and worry about what that exposure could mean to my family and everything else. And so I think it is every challenge is just a new opportunity. And I appreciated that sentiment.
Great. There are a couple questions here that I'm just looking at, and one is, you know, again, I'll put it out there, but we have a civic election next year. What do you think we need to ask our candidates? There's a provocative question.
I'm really interested in, do you believe that cities are actually an important part? In Canada, cities do not have the same authorities to make decisions that jurisdictions in the US have. Taxing ability, they don't have ability to raise money. They are really products of the province, and the province controls all of everything, right? The province controls how we operate. So the city of Calgary and the city of Edmonton are treated the same way as the town of Banff to some degree. And so I think it's really important for us to look at the fact that our city states are what in many ways are driving innovation and driving productivity, and the needs of the cities are very different than the needs of rural communities. And that doesn't one is necessarily super modern or the other, it just means that they're different. And cities need to have a different ability. In my mind, cities need to have the ability to make decisions and finance decisions on behalf of their citizens without having to go begging the province for that. So I think how they believe that the province and the city should interrelate, and would they be prepared to do the advocacy that's required around pushing the provinces for changes to that is important.
Bonnie or Kiran or Brandy?
I'm not from Calgary, but I feel very strongly that, you know, representation is how we move the needle on these issues. And at the political level, the more women, the more individuals representing, you know, kind of the non-white traditional, you know, heteronormative man that has been holding power for a long time in this country, the more different voices we can have at those tables. That's what I would like to see. So I think we can all be asking ourselves, wherever we are in our cities, in our provinces, federally, who are the candidates locally that we can either be encouraging to step forward to be nominated? Who can we throw our support behind? Who can we fund? Because we know that funding is a huge, barrier to get people into those positions to begin with. So who can we put our weight behind in a very intentional way to make sure that those spaces are more populated with the people who are reflecting the country that we're trying to build, or the city too. And it's the same, that we see in leadership, whether it's corporate sector or nonprofit, or, likely what I'll do, what Emma's already done, is forging your own new path and creating, businesses and opportunities that better reflect the world that you want to live in, right? Like, you build, if it doesn't exist, build it yourself. Let's get out there and do it. So yeah, I feel strongly that we can always be very intentional about who we're supporting and how, for sure.
I just want to jump in on that. I love that there's an organization here, the 51, but one of the things they're talking about is financial feminism and the ability of women to, the money is really the last bastion of power in the world, and that money has political impact. Money makes the world go round, and wealthy men are always invited to invest their money. Wealthy women are invited to give their money away. But if women start actually thinking about investing in other women, and then on top of that, that gives you the power to build. I mean, my fantasy would be to build like a PAC within my company that actually ends up funding and financing the women who are going to run for office and support the plans that we want to support. And that's how, you may not like the system, but for now, that's what the system is. So how do we manipulate that to work in our advantage?
Fantastic. Bonnie, there's a specific question for you, and that is, what was the one thing that made you feel okay or feel brave enough to pull the trigger on your pause?
It was two things. One is, I've never been a person that's lacked for confidence. That's, just a superpower. I always believe I'm going to land on my feet. So no matter how hard I'm going to get knocked down, this is not the career path I thought I was going to take 20 years in. That's okay. I'm going to land on my feet and I'll figure out my new path. So I think confidence is a big one there. That's helpful. And the other place, just to be, really honest, is the financial plan. Like, having an emergency savings that is there, that if you need to take a little window of a few months and recreate yourself for whatever reason, whether it's you intentionally made that decision or, it was made for you for one reason or another, that you have a little bit of a buffer, that you don't have to rush out and take the first thing that comes along because you're in an emergency situation. And again, that goes back to being, certainly a place of privilege. And I understand that, but it's something I think everyone can intentionally work towards, even if it's just a little bit each month. That I think that's been a really important piece that I've been so grateful for this year, that for the first time in 20 years, I've had to call on that, but here it is. And I'm really grateful for it. So confidence and some financial planning to give yourself a little buffer.
For sure. Well, thank you for that. And then related to that, there was an earlier question too. So would you consider that, being able to pause, is that easier in Canada? One of our participants saying in the US, we don't really have that kind of option.
Well, to clarify, I just came up with the term pandemic pause because I'm not leaving the workforce. I'm coming back. It just might be a new invented me. The pause is intentional for me as well. It's saying, I was at light speed for so long, and I just need, a couple months to kind of take a step, reset the family, and come back. So I haven't taken a pause for my career. I had to officially resign from my job to do this. So there's no security here. It was a big risk, and I've gone for it. So I hope that that's helpful. I don't know that it's any easier anywhere in the world. I think it's just really individual circumstances and situations that would lead to be able to do it, for sure.
No, and that's an interesting clarification. Thanks, Bonnie, because I know within certain organizations, at least ones I'm familiar with, companies are looking at what can HR, what can a company do to allow people to take, what we're calling maybe an emergency leave, to, voluntary resignations, to whatever, just to kind of help people sort of meet them where they're at. And then for those emergency leaves, that there is an opportunity to say, okay, if you need to leave for a period of time, you can come back, right? But I know not all companies do that, but I think more and more, whether it's in Canada, I can't speak for the US either, but I think to the earlier point, if it doesn't exist, maybe try to help create it, right? Maybe share some of these opportunities or ideas that others can take and learn from, right? So, I mean, some of the stuff didn't exist before, but as a result of COVID, I think it was Churchill who said this, like, don't waste a good crisis. Let's learn from what we've all been in and take the best out of this experience and make it our new reality. Emma?
Yeah. Oh no, I was scratching my head there. Sorry.
That's okay. You popped onto my screen, so I thought maybe you had a
breathed hard. Sorry.
yeah. Okay. No, that. I think that's great. One question I'd like to that was submitted by one of our registrants when they first signed up is, how would you tell your boss, right, that you need to take a mental break without disclosing your diagnosis?
That's a hard one. So I guess the question becomes why you do or don't want to disclose. And the reality is, like, I mean, so my dream world, in addition to universal childcare, is that we will also have no stigma around mental health, and we'll be able to talk about our mental health concerns and diagnoses without any judgment. I don't live in that world yet. None of us do. And so there is still a lot of risk for a lot of people, even though there ought not to be, with talking about mental health in the workplace. And so for me, that's a big piece of the work that I do, is working on fighting some of that stigma and building those supports. There is a requirement to accommodate for mental illnesses and diagnoses in the same way that you would have to for a physical illness. So that is one piece of the puzzle to consider when you are considering whether or not to disclose. I think sometimes though, and I think the pandemic has created a bit of an opportunity around this, that sometimes the conversation can just be more along a little bit of a vaguer conversation about a medical leave. Or just needing to take a little bit of time off. The challenge is that for a medical leave, you usually have to disclose to someone what it is. The way that the protections go, you're like, if your company has an HR person and you talk to your HR person about needing to like apply for a medical leave out, because a lot of companies that have extended health benefits also have short-term and long-term disability leaves that also apply for mental health as well as physical health. And so applying for one of those leaves, you might have to disclose some of it. The challenge can then become around returning to work. And in fact, the research shows that mental health leaves are actually tend to be the longest leaves, as well as the hardest to come back from. Because, if work gossip chains being what they are, if someone's taking time off for a cancer treatment and they come back, we're like, hey, how's it going? Like, we feel more comfortable talking about it. Whereas if someone is off for anxiety or depression or the like, then it's much harder to know what to say, because we don't have a culture around supporting people through mental health challenges. So one of the things that you might want to look at if you're concerned about disclosing around illness and around diagnosis would be to talk about like looking at what other kinds of opportunities your company has for unpaid leaves or paid leave options. So maybe you can do like a sabbatical, something like that. So looking through the policy manual that you have. And then I think even maybe just saying like, look, I just, need to take some of my vacation time. Because I think that's one of the things is a lot of us are maybe thinking we're not going to take our vacation time this year or not taking as much vacation time. But even if you're just, because we can't really travel. And so, but having that time off to have that real break from the workplace can be really helpful. And then I think also, just disclosing what you can and what you feel comfortable disclosing. Because I think, ultimately, if your instinct is this is going to go poorly, if I'm honest with them about what's going on, I would trust that instinct. Like I said, I want to live in the world where it's okay for you to talk about it, but that's not always the case. And then I would just say to the person who submitted this question, if you go to my website, there's a link to book a call. So feel free to reach out and we can talk through your situation a little bit more. Just book like a complimentary chat.
That's awesome. Thank you, Brandy. And I know, like, even with my own experience, I have worked through some mental health challenges, and it did take a bit of courage or finding a safe place within my organization to have certain conversations. Because you're right, if it was cancer, or if it was diabetes or heart or whatever, those would be something we deal with right away, and openly, mostly openly. Some of the things that we've been doing, like you say, be part of the change you want to see. So I'm trying to walk my talk and create a safe place for others as I'm sharing my journey, as I'm feeling more comfortable in my journey. I also think that as we are working through this, some of the things that we're doing, that we typically in our organization, we have what are called safety moments before we start meetings, et cetera. And those safety moments have turned into psychological safety moments, right? So instead of it being about process safety or things happening in our facilities, if I'm on point for doing a safety moment, I get to choose the topic. So I choose psychological safety. So then starting to eke it into the culture and into the organization. And then other people are starting to share stories. And it's amazing the number of people who come out and say, oh my gosh, thank you for sharing that. So there are also other ways that I've seen it kind of be safer within an organization to share and, start to bring your whole self to work. And I'm also happy to share some of those experiences and, maybe how to kind of organically bring that forward too. So
if I could just dovetail from that, I think that's brilliant. And it's a really important point that it's not always safe to talk about your mental health and your mental well-being. But for folks who are in a position where it is safe for them, maybe folks who are in a leadership position or even just in one-to-one conversations, the more that we can be open and talk about how we're really doing, the more that we build that safety across the organization and begin to shift the culture within the organization so that it is okay to not be okay. There's also some really great resources available through the Mental Health Commission of Canada and the Canadian Mental Health Association around talking about mental health at work. It's also something that I do in my practice. So if that's something that your organization or that you think maybe needs to be brought to your organization, again, just reach out. I'd love to chat more about it because it's such an important piece. And I think one of the great things, if there's a great thing about the pandemic, and I'm loath to say there's great things about this experience because it's been so challenging for so many people, but I have really noticed a shift in how we talk about how we're doing and a new level of openness about struggle and challenge that I have never seen before in my career. And to be clear, for 2.5 years, my job was to sit down and talk to people about their mental health experiences. And I am seeing a level of openness that I had never seen before.
Perfect. No, thank you. And you know what, this is, like I said, it's a topic, it's a well-rounded topic that we could actually be sharing and talking about for days. So the conversation, I think to your point and everybody here too, and looking at the chat, the conversation doesn't end tonight with respect to any of the topics we covered. I would like to turn it over to Susan to close off the session and thank everybody very much for participating, for being vulnerable, for laughing, for swearing, for all of it. We all have unique experiences, and I say thank you to everybody and stay well. Over to you, Susan.
Thanks, Rhonda. Wow, what a session. I've just been soaking this all up. I mean, I took wasn't a pandemic pause because it was about 10 years ago, but really consciously took a pause from my work, as did my husband. And it was not an easy feat. He spent a couple of years putting in a new workplace policy that would allow him to take a sabbatical of sorts. And we had to ensure that we had the funds to cover our 6-month travel adventure. I worked 2 jobs to pay for it for 2 years prior. It wasn't an easy thing. I was totally burnt out by the time we got to the break. But it was well worth it. But I will say it wasn't an easy thing, and it's not. And we both did it knowing we might not be coming back to our jobs. So it was something that we just had to take the leap and do. But it was life-changing for us. So I just throw that out there. It was really interesting perspective shift that it gave both our entire family. Anyway, thank you so much for attending tonight. As I shared earlier, with Lean in Canada now, we're having monthly events, and we're ensuring that something out of Lean in Toronto, Lean in Vancouver, and Lean in Calgary is happening every month. We are next up out of Calgary here in February, and we're looking at an event around the Confidence Code, which is a book that had a huge impact on my life by Katty Kay and Claire Shipman. And it's for women of all ages and all stages of their career, and understanding the importance of confidence and how you can achieve more of it. So we'll be following up with more details in the days to come. And if you hadn't had a chance to review the McKinsey study, we'll also be providing a link and other resources to our event and follow up. I expect you'll also be getting a survey because we usually do that too. So thanks you all for coming and taking time out of your busy Zoom-filled week. And we really look forward to getting your feedback about tonight's session and seeing you at a future one.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Stay safe.